Hello, it's Lromanosky from Calgary, Canada. I'm shooting from the Lug Nuts facility, and we always have some kind of cool cars here. But the feature of this video is going to be this 2009 Aston Martin DBS, and this car is going to be listed on Bring a Trailer. And so this video then will be an auction preview on this particular car, and as is my custom, I do a long video, maybe an hour at length, broken up into different parts. And so they start off with a little bit of history or general knowledge about the car in question, and then go to this particular car, and then we do a really careful walk around of the exterior. We do a paint meter report to look at the original paint depth. We go through the interior and then put the car on the hoist, take the wheels off. With this car, it's got full belly pans, so we took all the under trays off, and then so you can get a good look at all the mechanical components, which are actually pretty cool on this car. And then we do a cold start video and a basic driving video, just to show you that everything works properly and there's no lights on the instrument cluster, etc. So all that kind of takes an hour. Some of it's perhaps a little bit long-winded, but I do break it up into sections. And so if you're not interested in my assessment of the DB9's or DBS's place in the late model collector car world, you can just fast forward to the paint meter readings if that's all you want. If not, hopefully you might find some of this interesting. I sold these cars brand new, and in fact I delivered this actual car in 2009, and so I may have some interesting tidbits for you, or arcane knowledge that you might want. If not, you won't hurt my feelings. But we'll turn this camera around, and I'll start with brief history of the DBS and what it is, where it fits into the Aston Martin lineage, why I think it's a significant car, what the impact was in the era, and then we'll get through the details of this particular machine. Okay, thanks a lot, and then please do like and subscribe, and watch more of my videos. In the background, you'll see a Z8, and that is also going on BAT. Soon. There's a R107 Mercedes which is being sold into Ontario, and the 300 SL is just in for service. I'm not selling that. The owner does not want to part with that car. Okay, we'll turn the camera around. Okay, so Aston Martin has been around for a very long time. It was started in 1913, and they made racing cars primarily in very small numbers. Let's skip the first 40 years of Aston Martin and fast forward to the post-war era, where it was offered to sale in the Sunday Times. It was bought by David Brown, who was an industrialist who made tractors and gearbox parts. David Brown also soon after bought the Lagonda car company, and Lagonda had hired away W.O. Bentley from Rolls-Royce Bentley when Rolls-Royce took over Bentley, and W.O. Bentley had developed a straight six twin cam engine. David Brown wanted the engine for a new sports car for the DB2. And so that's where Aston Martin Lagonda came from, and that 2.6 liter straight six was then put in the DB2. Okay, so that's where the DB name comes from. That's David Brown, and the first DB2 would have come out in the early 50s, 51 or something like that. They also made something called a DBR1 and won Le Mans with it, with Carroll Shelby and Roy Salvador. Okay, so then we have the DB. The DB2 gives way to the DB Mark III, gives way to the DB 4, 5, and 6, and then in the late 60s, that DB 4, 5, 6 line is kind of getting antiquated. They come up with a new design, and that's William Towns, and he comes up with the something called a DBS, which is what this is called. And so then that DBS, the new V8, it was always supposed to have a V8, wasn't ready. And so then there's two DBSs. There's a DBS 6 using the old DB6 engine. And then there is the DBS V8, and that came out in around like 1970 or 71. They had lots of problems with that V8. They took it to Le Mans, didn't fare particularly well. I think the engines melted, so it needed considerable redesign. But they managed to get it right in the early 70s. It started out injected, but then they went back to Big Weber downdraft carburetors, I think for emissions. Anyway, so that car soldiered on from the 70s all the way, Aston Martin didn't have any money, and they continually went bankrupt. I had a 76 V8 coupe, and the price list for it, on the price list, the company that printed it was the receiver, because it was in receivership. So I think they had 3 or 4 owners. Victor Gauntlet was a petroleum, he owned an oil company, he bought it. Before that, I think some Canadians owned it, or at least partly. Sprague, I think the guy's name was. Anyway, it went through owner to owner, industrialist to industrialist, and finally, and they didn't have any money to make a new car, so it was basically that old William Townes design. It became a Virage, just basically a rebody in 1990. And it was only when it finally sold to Ford that they actually had some resources to, start at least thinking about making a new car. This was the Ford's premier automotive group. It was led by Jack Nasser. It included Jaguar, Land Rover, Volvo, and Aston Martin. Okay. They recruited Ulrich Bez from Porsche, who got turfed out of the company. I can't remember. I think he had trouble with the new CEO, Wiedeking, who was the cost control master. And anyway, they fell out. Ulrich Bez, who's known as the father of the 993 Porsche, came available. He joined Ford with Aston Martin. They had Ian Callum, who was the head stylist. And he went on to a terrific, still is with Jaguar, really completely reinvented that brand. So we have Ford money, and we have Ian Callum, the designer, and later they brought on Henrik Fisker as well. Okay, so that's the kind of the gel of the new Aston Martin that actually has some money to develop some new cars. They were trying to figure out what to do with an XJS, and I think it was Ian Callum who came up with a new XJS. They shopped it to Jaguar, and Jaguar didn't want it, and so then they gave it to Aston Martin and said, well, what do you think of this new Jag XJS? And they said, well, why don't we make that an Aston Martin instead? So that XJS that came out in 1976 or 5 or whatever became the DB7. Okay, so that was like kind of the first car from Aston Martin from this new group. Styled by Ian Callum. It's very beautiful. It started out with a supercharged straight 6, which was a development of a Jaguar engine, and then later it got a V12, and the V12 would have been basically 2 Ford V6s, with a loosely based on 2 Ford V6s, okay? And that was a DB7 V12. But it was still, the chassis was still from 1976. It was still basically an XJS under the skin, okay? So wasn't a terribly great car, although it was charismatic. All right, so then they have a fresh start in, maybe 2004, 2005, something like that. And they come out with this VH chassis. And this is a complete departure from the XJS. It's totally modern and up to date. It's aluminum, an aluminum bonded and riveted monocoque with extruded aluminum pieces. It's very stiff. It's unique in that the forward of the bulkhead, it can unbolt. So some cars like Ferraris, it's just one piece. So if it ever gets in an accident, basically the car is just completely ruined. At least with the Aston Martins, you can unbolt it up to the firewall. Not that this one has been in an accident, because it hasn't, but it's a little bit more of a practical design. than some of the other all aluminum cars, you know, like an NSX or a Ferrari. Okay, so they come up with this new modular chassis. It can accommodate front-mounted gearboxes or rear-mounted gearboxes on subframes. It is modified. It can change for width and for length. And then they spin off the Aston Martin Vantage and DB9. I think in 05 we got the DB9 first. So completely up-to-date car. This has a development of the DB9 has a development of the 6-liter V12 engine, and the Vantage has a dry sump to V8. The engines are built in Cologne in Germany, and then the cars are assembled in the UK. Okay, so we have the DB9. I think the first year for that was 05, and the Vantage I think started in 06. And now Aston actually is really doing well, and they even made a profit. And you know, that is pretty unusual for Aston Martin because they've been in business for, you know, well, I guess 110 years now, and I think they've only made a profit like 4 of those years, which is really quite amazing. Literally, like they've only made a profit a handful of years in 110 years history. Okay, so Aston's doing really well, and then they're expanding the dealer network. I'm in Calgary. Calgary doesn't have an Aston dealer. And I was with Ferrari in 08 and selling the major competitor to this, which is the 599. And then Ferrari was hell. I was only there for a year, so I moved to Aston Martin. And then I actually delivered this particular car to the owner in 2009. So I've known it from brand new. And Aston was doing great, and Calgary was doing great. I think we sold more Astons than any dealership in the country for a while, anyway. So this DBS, which was a development of the DB9, really just sort of resonated with at least the clientele around here. So the DB9, it's based heavily on the DB9, but with a lot more carbon fiber, carbon ceramic brakes, a different, different fenders, a much more aggressive stance, different wheels, added spoilers, diffusers, front air dam. The interior is Alcantara now, or Alcantara and leather. At least that's one of the options. And the engine's been breathed on. I think a regular DB9 had 440 horsepower, and I think this is 510. So they took a DB9, and then it was heavily influenced by the DBR9, which was the GT1 Le Mans car, which won the GT1 class at Le Mans 2 years in a row, I think in 07 and 08. And it was a fantastic car, and using the same block heads and so on as this particular car, and it won Le Mans. Okay, not easy to do, even if you have the resources. Okay, so then they took what was basically the DBR9 race car, and they made it into a production car, which is the DBS. Okay, 6-liter V12. You could have it with a Graziano 6-speed manual gearbox, or a 6-speed, I think, ZF automatic transmission. They all came with standard brake, all came with ceramic brakes. There weren't too many options. I mean, you could, when you ordered an Aston, you pick your leather color, the upper leather, the lower leather, the stitch color, all that stuff. There's a bunch of different woods you can choose from. The only really significant option was the Bang & Olufsen sound system, and I think from memory that might have been about 10 grand. And they don't all come with that. And it was the first, I think, one of the first cars with the fancy tweeters, which then pop up when you start the ignition. Okay, so we've got a front mid-engine, V12, manual transmission, 510 horsepower car that is developed from a Le Mans winning GT1 car. Okay, so that's pretty special. There aren't very many front engine manual transmission V12 cars around. When I was selling 599s, you could order that in a manual, but we told everybody not to do it because, you know, the owner of the dealership said, "Oh, I just came back from Italy. That gearbox doesn't work in that car. It's got too much power. You can't have a manual gearbox in a 599, and you'll never get the car. They're not making any anyway, and you'll have to wait like a year and a half for the car, and you don't want the manual." So anybody who wanted a manual 599 was convinced to get the F1 gearbox. Okay, so there's like almost none of them around, and if you can find a manual 599, it's like $500,000 or $600,000, like 3 times the price of the F1 car. F1 car. So we've got that. You know, it's a pretty short list. I mean, Jaguar made a TWR Sport XJS in the 1990s, and I don't know, like a few hundred, if that, maybe less. There's Ferrari 550s and 575s from the early 2000s. But after, I mean, literally, it used to be the gentleman's express. I mean, you know, a V12 Jaguar E-Type, a V12 Ferrari. It used to be, you know, the recipe for, you know, the most expensive, the smoothest, the most refined, the fastest, or whatever. And now that's kind of gone. So it's you know, that's why I think the DBS is a little bit special, because it does have that configuration, and you know, there can't be. I mean, Ferrari's going to try to hang on to a V12, and but everybody else, I'm sure, will abandon it. It's just not compatible with the current emissions and CO2 regulations and so on. So in terms of like a long-term collectability, I mean, you've got something that looks fantastic. You have something with Le Mans heritage. You have something that's a good car. It handles well, it's fast, it sounds nice, sounds awesome. It's constructed really well. I mean, it's a very high quality machine. You'll see that when I get to the part of the video when I look underneath. You know, we've got bypass valve on the exhaust to open it up a little bit. We've got adaptive damping, but really it's kind of a basic car. You know, but with you know, really high quality, beautiful sort of castings and beautiful componentry. So that's why I think a DBS is a future classic, and the prices have been rising. Okay, so let's have a bit of a closer look around. Well, we can see this big lump of an engine, 6-liter V12 that's built in Cologne. The car was hand assembled and inspected hand built in England and inspected by Barry Griffin. We can see the big cast aluminum pieces from the VH chassis and the aluminum strut braces. This is a wet sump car. The V8 Vantages are dry sump. V12, twin cam per bank, and 510 horsepower in this car. The battery is in this car. Oh, it's in the trunk, I believe. And you've got the remote battery terminal there. The bonnet and the fenders and the boot lid are all carbon fiber composite construction. So they're very lightweight. I don't know if you can see that, but it's painted. But that's all carbon. The doors are aluminum, and I believe the rear wings are steel. So that's the construction of it. This is a composite piece. They all come with an umbrella, and you can see that you've got reasonable trunk room. When we were selling them new in the showroom, everybody wanted to fit their golf clubs in, and we'd bring golf clubs and fit them in the corners there, and they would fit. They have what are called swan doors, and when you open them, they are designed to stay open at any point. There's little there's struts that go in the front fender to do that. And you can set, you should be able to set the distance anywhere. As the car gets older, the struts get weaker. So as the door gets closer to the end of its travel, it'll just close. It has these flush door handles with these little lights in them, and you press down on this side and then open it up like so. And that actually, if you'll forgive the sort of the gratuitous comparison here, is an awful lot like this old Mercedes, where you press down and then get the hammer. All right, I just had to do that. We have a big carbon fiber diffuser in the back and lovely twin exhausts. Behind the exhaust there is a resonator. In that resonator there's a bypass valve, so there's two different flows through the exhaust system, and one is in quiet mode. We've got giant, I think 15.7-inch ceramic brakes, 6-piston calipers, and lightweight. I think the wheels are from Italy. Anyway, gorgeous setup with that. We've got adaptive dampers, which vary the stiffness depending on how aggressively the car is driven. We've seen the umbrella. This is a bracket for the front license plate, which we don't need in Alberta. Inside the car, this is the same architecture as a DB9, but we get more sporting materials. You could have leather or Alcantara for the centers. This one's Alcantara. You could have little seats back there or a shelf. This one has the shelf. Seats aren't too good for anything. We have a fly-off handbrake. So this is the kind where you can set the brake and then it falls back down as opposed to always being up. And to release it, you pull it all the way up, press the button, give it a little tug, and do that. I always warn people when I delivered these that to not take the handbrake and reef on it as much as you can, because then you won't be able to pull it up anymore and release it. Anyway, we've got memory seats as you'd expect, and let's just mileage on this car is just over 15,000 kilometers. We've got the piano black veneers, and these do crack, and this one doesn't, which is good, and they scratch pretty easily, and this one isn't scratched. So the veneers are something you have to look out for, and carbon fiber trim. The navigation system was out of date when it came out in 09, and it's from a Volvo, so I don't know anybody who ever uses it. We do have a glass key. This is the spare key, and I keep the glass key tucked away because it's $2,000. If you drop it, you'll chip the crystal on it. To start the car, you put the clutch in and then press the key in and hold it. Takes a second, and then it fires with that lovely bark. The navigation system, I even forget how to use it. Even turning it on is a hassle. I can't remember how to do it, but it does work. Okay. I remember having trouble with this thing when it was new, trying to figure out how to. Oh, there we go. All right. So then you get this little nav screen, and I guess we're pressing this enter button for easy mode. Yeah, easy mode. And then you get that tiny little screen. Okay, so it's got the, I don't know if we went through that theater. Maybe I'll do that again. Turn the system on, then you get this thing popping up. So everybody was very oohed and awed at the time about that. 6-speed manual gearbox, and you get this big chunky aluminum gear lever. We've got both keys, we've got the books, and in this book is me. I was selling these in those days, which is kind of funny. So I've known this car from new. Okay, turn the car off. Okay, so that's a brief history of the DBS. And what about this particular car? Well, I met the client in '08 when I was at Ferrari Maserati. He had already ordered this DBS. The James Bond movie had, I think, just come out. And it was a real sensation. He placed his order for it. And then I also sold him a Maserati GT for his wife. So it was kind of a his and her car year for them. They kept the cars up until very recently. The Maserati just got traded in. They gave the DBS to me. So I've known this car from new and delivered this car when it was new, and my business card is still in the owner's manual. It is just over 15,000 kilometers. He drove it on Fridays in the summer. It was just, it never, I don't think it did any more than that, which explains 15,000 kilometers in 14 years. It was serviced at the dealer. It has never any accidents or paint work. Nothing ever happened to it. It had a pretty unremarkable life. It didn't have any invasive service work done. There's really not much to tell about its history. It sat in the garage and went out on Fridays in the summertime, and that's basically it. Not much has ever been done to the car. It's still wearing its original tires, which are quite, well, they're serviceable, but they're worn and they're old. It hasn't, the 3M hasn't been replaced. It has never been modified. There's been no radar detectors or any audio equipment that's been added to it. It hasn't had any paint work. All of the finishes are original. All the finishes on the wheels are original. Nothing really has ever been done to this car, except it got a few major services in its life, and that is it. There will be people, on bat who might say, well, why didn't it go in every single year for an Aston Martin service? And I would, and I guess there's some benefits to that. Although what I would say to that, and this isn't a convenient argument, is the less that's been done to the car probably is the better, because it's less invasive work. It's less times the car is brought to the dealership. It's less times something can happen to it. I see cars all the time with low mileage, and the fasteners for the under trays, half of them are missing, clips are broken. When the car gets handled anywhere, despite the best intent of whoever's looking after it, usually there's some wear to the car, and worse. I'll bore you with one story. We had an Aston Martin in for service. The service guy was an idiot. He took the car home, on a sort of auspice of testing something. He stopped at the tanning salon to get a suntan. The owner's daughter worked at the tanning salon. The owner's daughter called her dad and said, "Dad, what's this Aston Martin DBS convertible doing in front of our tanning salon with our service writer?" Okay. So the guy took it with the top down and the sunglasses on, parked the thing in front, and got a suntan. And amazingly, they didn't fire him. And he went on to be the service manager of a Land Rover dealership, and I'm not making this stuff up. Anyway, I digress. A car that's not been touched, that's not been handled, that nobody's been in, I would rather have that car rather than one that went in for an oil change every 1,000 kilometers, even though it didn't need it. And the oil's just as happy sitting in the sump. And it's not like the car, was started and moved around a lot. It was driven regularly, once a week. brought up to operating temperature. So it's not like the thing sat on a car lot and was like moved around 20 feet each time. So you know, I view that as a major plus, that this is, I mean, as close to the way the car was when it left the showroom as you're going to find. It does have a couple small cosmetic imperfections. There's some very light, just caught the edge of that one wheel a little bit. You know, the tires are original and should be replaced. We've got a little bit of curb rash on this side too. The other ones are fine. There's no marks on these. There's no scoring on the brake discs. Okay, so for whatever reason, we've got a little bit of light crazing on the headlight, just on the driver's side. Passenger side is okay. There's a couple very fine marks in it, but for whatever reason, this one crazed. I don't know why. If it's heat or if it's an impact or whatever, but no, the glass isn't broken, but you can see those kind of fine lines. It picked up a couple minor door dings in the rear quarter. There's just a couple tiny ones there. Now that's a steel quarter, and so those would be easy to take out if the new owner wishes. There's a couple on that driver's quarter, and there was a couple, they're tough to see, but there's a couple little ones beneath the handle here somewhere. Yeah, they're really small. I think those are just from a ring. Okay, this particular car has a full 3M, and back then it wasn't done great. Like you can see, there's a gap on the edges. There's the odd little scuff in the 3M, not on the paint, but it's held up pretty well, I think. We couldn't get rolls that big, and so they had to be sort of hand cut, so you can see the different lines in it, and it doesn't, there's gaps where there's no 3M. So they did their best at the time, but you can see the line of the 3M here, and there's no coverage in there because they didn't want to deal with the vents. So the 3M, it's not yellowing, but we can do a better job today than we did back then on 3M. Okay, and so that's about it. The car has no paintwork. Like I said, nothing's been refinished. Nothing's been blown in. The leather hasn't. There's been no rips or tears that have been repaired. There is no. The leather hasn't been painted. It has its original patina. The dash hasn't been repaired. Even when these were new, this dash leather is susceptible to shrinking, and what happens is it kind of peels off from the edge there. Even when they're new, we got a number of cars that just because they sat around at the port or whatever, the leather was pulling back. So that's very common on these cars with the natural products. And if it's been left out in the sun, it'll happen. Okay, so just about anything from Arizona or California or whatever that's been left out, you'll see the leather shrinking. In Calgary, it's not such a big problem, and most of the Calgary cars, that's not common here. But whenever we see a car from a hot state, Texas or whatever, we see that problem. The wood does crack. It starts to crack on these edges and radiate out. And even when the cars were a few years old, we used to see that. And the wood on this is perfect. Okay. We've got maybe a tiny little bit of scuffing on the gear shift, but that's aluminum and it'll polish out. The carbon fiber, sometimes we see that delaminating and so on, and not in this car. Sometimes the lower doors can be susceptible to seals. Again, it's leather, so if you're at all not very careful or a little heavier set and kind of fall into your car or whatever, it'll show up pretty quick. Same thing with the Ferraris as well. They mark up extremely easy. I wouldn't describe any of the finishes in the Aston as particularly durable. The paint is beautiful, but it's soft. The leather is beautiful, but I mean, you can. If I take my fingernails, you can scratch the leather easily. It's not the same product that you find in a Mercedes or something like that. That's, got half a millimeter of plastic on top of it. So what that means, though, when you're looking for a car, for an Aston, or anything with like, that aniline leather, that natural porous leather, it will fade, it'll shrink, the wood will crack, it'll scuff up really easily, the paint will scuff up easy. So there's nothing about an Aston that's particularly, in terms of the finish, that's particularly durable, meaning if anybody's hard on the car at all, I mean, you'll see it. And when a dealer gets it, they're going to try to fix it all so it looks good in photographs, and so they'll spray the leather and they'll get the repair guys in or whatever, but the leather's not the same after it's been sprayed. So it's only original and porous once. And you really don't want to get in there and start ripping the wood out to try to replace it and, replacing these leather panels and so forth. So, to find a car that just hasn't been touched and it's been sort of carefully driven, carefully stored, hasn't been left in the sun, where people were careful getting in and out of it, and they didn't wear the bolsters, they didn't chew up the sills or whatever, that's actually pretty rare. I've seen cars with Ferraris and stuff with 5 or even like 5,000 kilometers that are already showing significant wear on the bolsters, okay? So that is something you need to look at with a car like that. Okay, so I think I've exhausted all of the little cosmetic wear items. When I get underneath the car, the carbon fiber on the spoiler, that's a pretty vulnerable piece. And if you get under there, at the very, very tip, it got a little bit scratched up. The 3M, has been on there for a while. There's places where, you can see it just starting to come off or yellow a little bit. And the fit of the 3M isn't that great, okay? But there's no scuffs, no impacts to the bumper. You don't, it's not like, sometimes the car can get banged a little bit and break some clips behind the bumper, and it can be a little bit loose. Again, these bumpers and splitters are pretty vulnerable, but there's nothing like that. Everything's in perfect shape there. The Calgary's a little bit tough on glass because there's lots of stone chips, and so this one, you see tiny little marks, but there's nothing that's going to crack. And it's the original windshield. The original windshield hasn't been pulled out, and the windshields are glued in. Sometimes that doesn't get done properly. So again, it just goes to my point of, this is an original car that's never been touched. All right, so here's my trusty paint meter. I set this up in micrometers, which is 1/1000th of a millimeter. And so original paint on a car is going to be 200 or so, 200 micrometers. Now, if I do it on the roof, we get 140, 120. You can't spray on repair, like you can't repaint a car and get paint depth of 100 micrometers. All right. So it's going to vary a little bit, even on brand new cars, and especially handmade cars. Now, the bonnet on an Aston is composite, so nothing happens. The fenders are composite, so nothing happens. The boot lid is composite. The rear fender is steel. Again, on a hand-built car, you're going to get some variations. If it was repainted, you'd get, you know, 4s and 5s. And we get down here, and it's composite. The doors are aluminum. Bumper is plastic, so you don't get anything. And rear fender. Okay, so that there's not actually any more we can do with a paint meter on this car because a lot of it's composite. So we've just finished cryoblasting the underside of this DBS, and we've taken off the splash guards. And so we can get a good look at the mechanical bits of the DBS, and it's quite an interesting car actually. So let's go through it, and we'll just point out some of the parts on it and some of the design features, and then look at this particular car just for the overall condition and so on. And so. It looks really nice. I mean, as you'd expect a car with only 15,000 kilometers. The Vantage, the DB9, the DBS were all part of a shared platform, which I believe was called the VH platform, and it was basically extruded aluminum sections mostly, and cast sections too, sorry, that were then bonded and riveted together. So that forms the whole shell of the car. And then there are aluminum subframes that are then bolted to the central driver's cage in the front at least. So that's actually pretty good design, because if anything does happen to the front of the car, this one's never been in an accident, but if you did damage it, you can at least unbolt, you know, this from the bulkhead forward, whereas something like a Ferrari, it's just all one big piece. And I mean, the car will just never be the same. So it's an interesting construction, and we can see, you know, these extruded aluminum pieces. We can see some of the bonding material that's in here, and then these would be forged aluminum suspension components. And we've got in the back, we've got a steel subframe that then supports the differential. And then we've got the giant ceramic brakes on the DBS. So if we look at the front, I don't know how big those are, but maybe 15 inches, and 6-piston calipers. We can see these structural. This is an aluminum subframe on the front, and it's all webbed for strength. The drive shaft is then carried in a torque tube, which you can see that right there. So it's completely shrouded, and that's a gorgeous piece, of a gorgeous casting actually. So that's a solid, rigidly mounted, this large differential unit, which has its own radiator right there, and then that's rigidly mounted to the gearbox here. Okay, beautifully done. These forged aluminum elements and gorgeous suspension pieces. Giant brakes. Okay, brake cooling's interesting. So got these big brake great air intakes, and then it follows through this channel, and then it's piped up through there, and then right into the back of the rotor. So that's like right out of a race car. There'd be an oil cooler up front somewhere. See if I can show that to you. And a big bore, really beautiful exhaust. And then the catalytic converters, and then branched out into the silencer. And there is a bypass valve on the silencer, which I guess is this little bit there. And so then you can have a quiet mode and a loud mode. So then when you start it up, you get a big bark, and then it'll settle down, but you can put it in the loud mode with that little solenoid there. Obviously, this is an expensive car. Aluminum cars, you know, very difficult to make in any sort of quantity, and they're expensive. And then, you know, all these beautiful aluminum components, ceramic brakes. And there's not too many front-engine V12 manual transmission cars around. I mean, the list of cars that fit that description is a pretty short one. Going through this example, like I said, only 15,000 kilometers. I mean, it looks virtually new under here. You know, everything is looks dry. Looking up into the engine, you know, there's no leaks that I can detect. There's no oil running down the side of the block or anything. I can't see any problem areas there at all. So let's give you a good view up in there. There's no damage. One thing about all the Astons is that they're not that easy to jack up because they have these plastic skirts, and there's only a tiny little cutout there. And if you don't use an appropriate riser, you'll crack the bodywork here. And looking at it, it's not that obvious where to jack the car up. And so what I've seen on a few Astons is where guys try to put the jack on this, thinking that this piece here is a frame rail, but it isn't. This is only the strengthening rib for the floor. This is thin gauge aluminum. If you try to put a jack, under that, you will dent it. Okay, so so sometimes when people aren't familiar with these cars, they'll try to jack under that, and they'll actually, they'll put a big dent in this. And this is just paint. It's not a dent. Okay, because let's make that clear right there. I guess I'm not sure why that is, but you can, if you do dent this piece, there's no easy way to fix that. You can't get at it from the top. And it's part of the whole structure that's bonded and riveted together. So if you get an Aston and there's a big crunch out of that from somebody using a jack, you can't fix it. At least not practically. So that is one quite important thing to look for on any of these VH bodied Aston Martins, to make sure that nobody has jacked it up improperly. You know, you might look at the bottom of the car for any damage or rock chips or, you know, scraping. The paint on the Aston is quite soft. It'll chip up and mark up really quickly. For the Astons that have been driven on gravel, this area here, the lower rocker, is often peppered with stone chips, and also behind the wheel as well. And this one isn't. So this one just was never driven in the gravel. I've seen some that are. So all these lower areas are still in nice shape. Behind the wheels and so on. I'll show you the rockers. We can see a little bit of rash on the bottom of this carbon fiber piece. And a little bit there too. But that's the extent of it. Underneath in this car is beautiful. Okay, so we can see the wheel wells are nice. They've been cryoblasted. The brake rotors don't have any chips on them. These are extremely expensive if you don't, as you can imagine. So you want to make sure that nobody's been clumsy and knocked this with the side of the wheel and put a chip out of one of the rotors. So look at those discs. And again, there's no chipping there. This is not scoring. It's just kind of a mark, a radial mark, but it's not, it doesn't catch my fingernail when I do that, okay? All right, so let's look at the rest of them. So we can check for damage on the bottom lip of the spoiler, and it looks pretty good. There is a tiny little bit of scraping just at the leading edge there on both sides. But otherwise, it is pretty good. And then once more along the top edge. The front is covered with 3M, and it's done its job pretty good. There's the odd little swirl mark in 3M. It's coming up drift a little bit there, but for 3M that was put on in 2009, it looks pretty good. There's a couple minor scuffs in there, but none of this is in the paint. It's just in the 3M protective coating, okay? And there's no damage or scuffs to the front bumper on the car. And the 3M, I mean, you'd have to be on your belly to see this when the car's on the ground, okay? So everything looks good from the front. Okay, so now we'll do a cold start. The vehicle was indoors. It was just moved outside. It's been sitting for an hour or two. So we'll do a cold start on the DBS. We'll let it warm up a little bit. We'll do a short drive video. It's not top gear. We're in an industrial area here, but I can at least give it a run up through the gears and up to highway speeds, and we can check the operation of the clutch and the gearbox. Check that there's no vibration from the tires or brakes, etc., that it makes no strange noises, and it doesn't have any warning lights on the dash. We'll start it up. Dale will show you what comes out of the tailpipe when we do so. We'll pop the hood, listen to the engine, and just go for a quick drive, really just to verify that the machine operates correctly. Okay, so let's do that. bypass in the exhaust. So two big pipes coming out of each bank of the V12. Then at the end there's a big silencer, and there's a little solenoid operated bypass valve that can give you more or less straight pipes bypassing the silencer. So when you start it up, you get this big vroom where it gives you a little bit of theater, and you get that big bark from the V12, and then it'll settle down to a quiet idle. So it does that automatically. Lift the very lightweight carbon fiber hood and see the V12. It's mounted, you can call it a front mid-engine car because the engine is basically behind the front axle line. It's 6-liter V12, very smooth and very tractable. I mean, it's almost impossible to stall this car. And we don't have any valve train noise or any other issue with running the car. As you would expect with a car with only 15,000 kilometers. So we'll drop the hood and just get it up about a foot above, and then. Okay, so in the car we have an instrument cluster that's free of any warning lights. We have an automatic climate control, and the AC does work well, and it blows ice cold. I'll turn down the fan just so you can hear me. Okay. We have 15,149 kilometers, and we're about to just put a few more. This car does have adaptive dampers, so we can stiffen up the shocks if we hit that button. And it has parking radar as well. That's what those are. Lock and unlock, and the remote trunk release. It's actually a pretty simple car. There's not much to it. It's incredibly flexible. I'm quite certain I can not touch the gas at all and then, not stall the car, which I'm doing right now, without even putting my foot on the gas. A very, very flexible engine. What's surprising to me about the car with a 6-liter engine, that actually the action on the gear shift is actually quite reasonable. It's actually quite a light gearbox. I mean, you drive some American cars with 6-liter engines and the gearbox is pretty clunky. So, I mean, you really, like, one of the beauties with the V12 is that, it is enough displacement to give you the torque you need, but because of the cylinders, multi-cylinders, many cylinders, the reciprocating mass is held down, making it easy to rev. So you get both high torque at low RPMs, and you get a nice smooth engine that's willing to rev high. And then if it revs high, it develops lots of horsepower. So that's why the V12s are, the choice of, just about at least all the vintage, the highest value vintage cars, even the luxury cars, because the V12 is really quite a perfect engine. Even though there are cars that tried to do V16s, they were never quite as sweet as a V12. So a V12 is really sort of the ultimate configuration for an internal combustion engine, and it's perfectly balanced and smooth in a 60-degree formation, which they most all are. So the front-engined V12 manual gearbox Grand Touring Coupe, well, that's pretty much the ultimate cross-continental express, as they would say in Europe. And there's not very many late model cars that combine those, as I've said earlier in the video. Okay, so it is a special drive, and the cabin of the Aston is beautifully turned out and finished, and it's simple and elegant. It's got enough creature comfort items to make you comfortable, but it's not like overdone. There's not, you know, hot stone massages and air scarves and a whole bunch of other stuff that just adds weight to the car. And mechanically, it's pretty simple too. And it's a real, I mean, it's a real pussycat at low RPMs. You can dawdle around and keep it under 3,000 RPM and just drive it, you know, normally in traffic, and it's perfectly happy. When you put your foot in it, wow, you get, that was wheel spin. I wasn't even trying. This is a properly fast car. And the V12s are just so special in that, you know, they're just so buttery smooth as they get up there in the revs. There's really nothing quite like it. And, you know, I think everybody should have a V12 car at least once. And, you know, even my Jaguar XJS, which is worth almost nothing, has a V12 in it, and it still makes that car special. I mean, there's something really quite special about a V12. You know, the synchros are good. Car shifts beautifully. There's no scratchiness at all. It's really a buttery smooth gearbox, and very friendly. Pedals are nicely placed for heel-to-toe driving. Brakes are nice and progressive. The early carbon brakes, carbon ceramic brakes, like if you got one from the early 2000s, they came out in, I think, a Mercedes SLR, and there were a couple, I think one of the roofs had carbon brakes, but in the very early days of ceramic brakes, they were really quite wooden, and they wouldn't bite at all until they heated up considerably. So I'm not sure what they did to the compounds of the ceramic discs or the pads, but you know, this car and subsequent ceramic brake cars don't have that characteristic. They have good bite and solid feel, you know, right from cold. So we'll give it one last blast here. Whoa, and brakes nice, huh? It's a properly fast car. All right, so, you know, I wish I could be on a twisty road on the Côte d'Azur showing you this car, but that isn't the case. I hope that we've just demonstrated that the car behaves itself properly, that the engine runs properly, that there's no warning lights on the dash, that there's no strange noises in the car, that it accelerates, shifts, brakes as new. This is exactly how I remember selling them in '09, and this is a very honest, original, one-owner car, and nothing bad's ever happened to it. It has all its original finishes. There's been no paint work, there's been no dyeing of the leather, there's been no repairs, there's no invasive maintenance, there's nothing. You know, it's due for tires and a major service that the next owner can do to the car. But it's basically, you know, just a well looked after one owner DBS. And like I said, I've known this car from brand new. Thank you very much for viewing. Lromanosky and Dale Walmsley from Calgary, Alberta. Please like and subscribe and look at my other videos. If you're interested in the DBS, I don't see how you could do much better than this one. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.